So I thought a fun way to respond to Simon Sinek's video, No Going Back to Normal, would be with a video response. I've found, as I mentioned above, I found the conversation that I've been able to have with my colleagues through Marco Polo. Those conversations that our principal has started have really been enriching and powerful. And so that's on video. And so I thought I'd try that out on this blog post as well. And so we'll see how it goes, and maybe this will be a part of my blogs that I do in the future. So one of the things I really found interesting about the part of the segment of that video. And it was probably only a segment of a longer podcast, perhaps, that he had done or show that he was doing. It was about 5 minutes that we saw here. Was he talks about infinite thinking or the infinite mindset, and how that brings a calm or a quiet confidence. And that I was really intrigued by that, fascinated by that, mostly because I'm a history teacher, and I'm like, well, what you're talking about is what a historical education is supposed to provide. That historical education, the purpose of a history education partly for us to recognize the patterns that we see. And so if we've been through something in the past and we can see the similarities to those situations here that we're going through now, that brings us a sense of calm, of quiet confidence. It helps us to recognize the patterns that may exist. It helps us to recognize, it helps us to have the humility to recognize, hey, even though this may seem similar, if we have a broad enough understanding, there's some differences here too. And to not make assumptions about, well, this is what was done in this situation, and see, there's this situation and this situation that are similar, so we should do the same things. Because we really have to exercise prudence as people that if you have any kind of understanding of history, because it can be very tempting, because history is full of all sorts of stories. It can be really tempting to find that story that fits your narrative, and then to use that to your advantage and say, see, this is what we should do, because look at this thing that happened in the past. Look at all these similarities, and so this is what we should do. And that's dangerous. And so a good history education will prevent people from being able to do that, because you will understand a broader perspective. And so you'll hear them talking and something doesn't sound quite right. And so you may not know all of the details of all events, of course, none of us do, but you can start to recognize that doesn't quite set right. Something doesn't sound right here. Let me look a little bit more into it. So a history education can help us to do that. And so I agree with his idea that bringing a kind of a calm or a quiet confidence. Another example that he brings up to help us, which I do have a little bit of a problem with, he brings up the idea of the hurricane, and that, we've been through hurricanes, and so we can see, we know what to expect. We know that it's going to be painful. We know that it's going to cause problems. We know all these different things. And he doesn't mean to be, to bring it and make it sound smaller than it is, I don't think, because he acknowledges the pain there. But I think there's also this sense of, the people that are really going to experience that experience the pain in a hurricane are often our most vulnerable. Those in our populations that are most vulnerable, those in our population that maybe do not have the same advantages that many others have. And so I think that's something that we have to be aware of, because he kind of compares that to the situation we're in today. And I think that is true. So I think that a hurricane often impacts the most vulnerable, disproportionately. And I think this pandemic is impacting our most vulnerable disproportionately. And so I see that as a real problem. As public school educators, as public schools, we have a responsibility not to just the students that show up in person. We have a responsibility to all of our students. We have a responsibility to the communities that we are a part of. And so as a public education, we really need to seek to serve that entire community and seek to serve those that are in our community that are maybe most vulnerable. And that's hard. That's not easy. That's not, I recognize, I think we all recognize that that's not a simple solution. If that was a simple solution, the solution would have been found long ago. But I think what happens and what we can see is, hey, maybe this is one of those opportunities where we're stretched and things are changing right now, and so maybe we can find some opportunities for ways to improve the education of all of our students, including our most vulnerable. So let me kind of just look here, make sure I didn't miss any of the points here. So one of the questions I even want to ask, feel free to comment on the blog, is what solutions do you see to this problem? What can we do? How can we, we have a responsibility to serve our most vulnerable, but we have a responsibility to serve all of our populations. So those that are most, that are maybe our most privileged, we still have a responsibility to serve them and to serve them well and to provide a strong education for them as well. And so how do we serve our populations and how do we do that? I think our technology capabilities makes it possible for us to maybe serve all of those populations in ways that reach them where they are, that haven't been in the past. But I think this unique situation helps us maybe to focus on some of the most vulnerable ones. One of the strengths, and so I've got a proposal, not a full-blown proposal, but a little bit of an idea that I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on. One of the strengths of the American education system has been that we provide all students with kind of a broad education. And I'm focusing here maybe, kind of on our core subjects that really, we don't track our students to where, they take this big important test at a certain age and then they go and they enter into a trade school at a certain age. Not that there's not some value in that. There certainly can be some values in those things. But one of the strengths of our American education system is that we have said we want to serve all of our population with this broad system where we are providing a strong history education. We're for providing a strong language arts or a strong English education system, literature, where they're exposed to great literature. We're providing them with a strong science and strong math education. And so I want to kind of look through each one of those things real quickly, each of those 4 core subjects and kind of a little bit of what they provide, but then see how we can talk a little bit about maybe what that looks like in a virtual setting and what freedom that may offer us. So, a historical education, I've already talked about some of what it provides, but it helps us to recognize the world and what we find ourselves in today. So we see the patterns of the past. We recognize how we've gotten to where we are. And so we can, have a balanced perspective. We can recognize that we've been through situations, and it gives us that sense of quiet confidence. It also helps us to recognize maybe when our leaders or potential leaders try to, pull the wool over our eyes and don't and take advantage of the fact that maybe somebody doesn't have a strong education, a historical education, and so they say, look, like I said earlier, look, this is something we should do because of these things, and we can, if we've provided our citizens with that education, that broad education, they'll recognize that and they'll be able to see that. Because one of the things, like at our school, one of our goals at Wellborn Middle School is to provide our students, is not to provide our students, is that our goal is that we are bringing about, we are making good humans. Okay, and so part of that would be good citizens, engaged citizens that are engaged in their community and engaged in their the places that they find themselves in. And so then I think about like an English education, a literature education. We want to provide them with a wide range of literature that exposes them to lots of ideas and lots of things. But then they see that, that they are open to other people's ideas. They can recognize the similarities. They can recognize the differences. That makes them a more compassionate human. But we at the same time are helping them to be able to comprehend and understand things more deeply, and be able to communicate more fully. And so they've got things in their mind to think about. So we give them a strong history education, a strong science education. So they've got those things to think about and wrestle with. And now they can communicate those things clearly. They can understand what they're reading because there's so many context clues that they maybe missed out before they had that strong understanding of history and of science. And so that brings me to science, and science gives us a great opportunity to help our students to recognize the order in the world and the order that they see and the way things happen and the way they can think scientifically and recognize and create hypotheses and then test those hypotheses. And so they can recognize the order in the world. And that brings a sense of, okay, this is the way things are. I understand how this works, and there is an order, there is a purpose behind these things, and we can see that, and we can therefore use all that vast knowledge to help our fellow man, help mankind, to whether it's through medicine or any of the other engineering feats, any of the other different things that science will provide us. And then finally, math. Similarly, I think it helps us in a lot of ways. Certainly, it helps us in our logical thinking. We can recognize, we can follow certain steps, and we get to these steps, and we'll have these outcomes, and we recognize that it helps to make good problem solvers. And so we are all about building good humans, but a big part of that is building a broad-based education. But if we can do that virtually, make those human connections, because a lot of those students of ours that maybe struggle and are invulnerable, one of the challenges we face is the human connection. How can we get the human connection? But then the other thing is, what the other big challenge, so I'd see one is the human connection. And these aren't all of them. I would love to hear the challenges that you see. But one of the challenges I see when we're in this virtual setting is, how do we keep that human connection? How do we make that human connection? Certainly, we've got some tools to help us solve that, but I'd love to hear other additional thoughts. But then also, how do we inspire and even how do we find out what are the passions of our students and give them opportunities to explore those passions. And at a certain age, maybe that's actually even exploring like credentialing, to where they're getting certifications, in a particular field that they're really interested in. And so they start to recognize, look, I'm getting this education in history and math and science, and I'm seeing, look at the payoff here. I'm understanding those things, but I'm also getting this job that is helping me to see, what it really takes to be successful in the world. So perhaps I could see one of the big benefits perhaps of this virtual setting is people having maybe a little more opportunity to be the guide of their own education, where they get certain things are a requirement that they get those things, but then they have a path to choose, and they can start to be, because we know that when people are passionate, when people get a choice, and when people's voice is heard, and when their voice and their choices are heard, and they get that opportunity to make those decisions, well, all of a sudden they are much more invested in their outcomes. And we need that. We need a generation of students that are invested in their education. They're not just avoiding or not paying attention. They're not engaged. We need a generation that is engaged and fully invested in their learning. And so I'm hopeful that with some wise thinking and some really critical thinking during these times, we can come up with some solutions that will provide our students with that broad education, but also that opportunity to make the choices and to find their own passion and seek those out. So that's some of what I think. I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments either on, this will be on YouTube, but it's also on my blog post. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts, both good and bad. I want to hear, challenge my thinking, challenge me, help me to be better. I want to hear it all. So thank you very much.